Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through velvet curtains into a world where love wasn't always romantic. Courtship was rarely private, and roses had thorns, sometimes literal ones sewn into embroidery. The air is perfumed with lavender water and power dynamics. You're not a damsel in distress. You're a noblewoman in a brocade gown that weighs almost as much as your political responsibilities. You're seated near the high table, your eyes scanning the hall, but not too eagerly. After all, someone is always watching. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit perfectly upright on a carved oaken bench, hands folded just so in your lap. Tonight, you're not just attending a feast, you're part of the spectacle. The court buzzes with honeyed words, half-truths, and careful silences. At your side, a younger cousin fidgets with a ribbon, eyes flitting toward a squire who's busy pretending not to notice her. You, however, know better than to make the first move. In your world, love isn't private, it's pageantry. Falling for someone isn't just dangerous, it's political. Your marriage will likely be arranged by men you barely know, and consummated in chambers where servants keep time. But that doesn't stop the aching curiosity, the pulse in your wrist when someone lingers too long in conversation. Historians still argue whether love as we define it even existed in your time, or whether what we now call romance was simply another flavor of obligation, spiced with longing. What's clear, though, is that you understood the rules, and you knew how to bend them without appearing to break them. You dab a bit of rosewater at your wrists, not for hygiene, but for symbolism. Roses mean more than beauty. They imply secrecy, purity, and yes, thorns. A suitor once sent you a carved box with a pressed bloom inside. You never opened it in public, but you kept it hidden beneath your writing desk for months. You told yourself it was harmless, and maybe it was. Or maybe that bloom outlasted the courtship entirely. You recall Eleanor of Aquitaine's wedding to Louis VII, celebrated not for love, but land. An entire province changed hands along with the bride, but Eleanor, clever and stubborn, used that marriage, and later, her second one to Henry II, as a political chessboard. You think of her often, imagining her penning notes in Latin and Provençal, equal parts poetry and subversion, a woman who played the game and, often, won. And then there's you, positioned, poised, painted into the background of 100 court scenes and yet quietly altering the script with every letter passed, every smile timed to perfection. You've never fought in battle, but your conquests are marked in whispered rumors and locked desk drawers. You once watched a rival blush when her secret was exposed during a feast. You offered her your fan with a look that said, "I've been there too." Of course, there were risks. A single misstep could ruin everything. A brush of fingers mistaken as affection, a smile misread, a letter intercepted. The court didn't just watch, it documented. Gossip here is sport, and reputations are currency. That's why love, real love, feels like a rebellion. It's messy, dangerous, and incredibly rare. Still, you dream. You dream of moonlit gardens and unsupervised walks, of shared verses and secret touches behind tapestry screens. You once wrote a line of poetry in your diary that made you blush so furiously you tore the page out, and then, hours later, retrieved it and smoothed it out again. There's a fringe theory you once heard from a visiting scholar, half drunk, of course, that claims some noblewomen use coded embroidery to communicate their affections, tiny stitches of meaning worked into hems and cuffs. Maybe it's a fantasy, or maybe your old governess really did warn you never to wear anything stitched with pomegranate thread. Tonight, as the feast continues and the musicians tune their lutes, your gaze flickers again to someone across the room. He isn't wealthy enough to be a proper match, but his wit is sharp, and his letters always smell faintly of mint ink. You let yourself imagine, just for a moment, a life where affection mattered more than inheritance. Then you pick up your goblet, take a slow sip, and return to the game. The letter arrives folded into the seam of your linen sleeve. No wax seal, no flourish, just pressed tightly enough that it won't fall unless you want it to. You feel it as soon as the maid brushes past you during your walk in the herb garden. She doesn't pause, doesn't even glance back. You, of course, wait until you're deep enough among the rosemary hedges that no one can see you hesitate. When you unfold it, your fingers trembling just slightly, the ink is still sharp, barely smudged. He's careful. Always has been. The words are oblique. There's no, "I love you." No foolish declarations. Just a phrase about falcons and freedom, and the time he saw you smile during that rainstorm under the cloister arch. It shouldn't mean anything, which is exactly why it does. Courtly love is an art, a performance wrapped in metaphor. You're not just passing letters, you're engaging in one of the most sophisticated forms of flirtation the world has ever known. Entire romances live and die in allegory. "My heart," he once wrote, "is a ship, and you the star it sails by." You wrote back that you were no star, more like the moon, constantly changing. It made him laugh. You remember the look he gave you after. He always took your metaphors personally. Historians still debate whether these correspondences led to real relationships, or if the majority of them were intellectual sparring matches, designed to pass time between weddings and wars. They cite noblewomen like Marie de Champagne, who demanded that romantic love follow strict codes. A lover must suffer for his lady, remain loyal, remain unfulfilled. You wonder if Marie ever burned a letter before anyone else could read it. Some of your letters you keep hidden in a false bottom drawer. Others you commit to memory and then burn. A few you send without reply, because the silence says more than you ever could. The game is not just about what you say, it's what you imply, and what you never admit at all. You've mastered the codes. You know that if he writes on blue paper, it means he's cautious, red, and he's reckless. If he signs with his name's first letter doubled, it means he's seen someone following him. Once, he included a pressed violet between the folds, and your heart leapt in a way that made you genuinely angry. You aren't supposed to feel this way. You're supposed to be clever, strategic, removed, detached. And yet, there's a story you once heard, whispered among the laundresses, about a duchess who carved her confessions into candle wax and melted them each night while she prayed. A secret flame, they called it. Whether true or not, you've never been able to look at your own prayer candles the same way since. You've also started writing poetry. Nothing public, of course. A few lines tucked into the margins of your psalter. One about longing, one about silence, one about the color green, which has always reminded you of the livery he wears during festivals. The monks say color has meaning. You agree. You also think it has memory. There are moments when you think about leaving the court entirely, fleeing to an abbey, perhaps, where the only letters are biblical and the only whispers are Latin. But you know yourself too well. You'd last a month before smuggling in a new quill and asking the abbot to let you copy secular manuscripts for practice. So you remain. You play the part. You smile when necessary. You bow when expected. And you carry 1,000 invisible pages pressed against your skin. The servants don't ask questions anymore. Not after you had that one dismissed for good reason. But still, you know the next letter will come during Vespers, probably slipped into the folds of your prayer book. You'll pretend not to see it, just long enough for propriety to be satisfied. Then, as the chant drones on and the shadows stretch across the stone floor, you'll trace each line with the tip of your finger, slowly, carefully, like it's a relic from a saint who once believed in something impossible. You've already memorized the next line of your reply. Something about falcons again. He seems to like those. You'll ask if he knows that falcons don't mate in captivity. You're not sure whether he'll understand the message, but if he does, he'll know where to wait. After all, you never sign your letters, but you always seal them with rosemary. The room is circular, narrow, and absurdly high. You live 3 stories above the ground, though your status means you're not really expected to descend unless there's a feast, a funeral, or a war. Today is none of those. Today you sit beside the arched window, half embroidering, half waiting, because that's what ladies in towers do, isn't it? The sunlight flickers through stained glass, casting crimson and gold halos across your lap. You're stitching a vine, though your hand moves slower than it should. Below, in the courtyard, someone is practicing with a staff. You don't look directly. You just listen to the thud of wood on earth, the occasional grunt, the shuffle of boots. The rhythm is oddly comforting, like the court's pulse beating somewhere beneath your feet. You're not technically imprisoned, just contained. For your own protection, they say, or reputation, or virtue, or some other word you stopped believing in 3 summers ago. Historians still argue whether noblewomen like you had true autonomy, or if the notion of medieval female agency is a flattering projection from modern minds. Some point to surviving letters, estate ledgers signed in a woman's hand, edicts issued while husbands were off crusading. Others counter that real power remained elusive, doled out in teaspoons when necessary, quickly withdrawn if you asked for more. Still, from this tower, you've written letters that moved men across borders. You once convinced your father not to send your cousin to a cloister. You had her married off to a friend's son instead. Unromantic, yes, but better than cold stone walls and silence. She still sends you honey in small ceramic pots. Sometimes, you wonder if you're the heroine of your own story, or just the setting. After all, towers are poetic, right? The lonely maiden, the long braid, the rescue. But you cut your hair short last spring, just because you could. And you've told more than one would-be poet that if they wanted to write you into their tale, they'd best give you more than a single stanza. Your maidservant, B, enters with a tray of rosehip tea and a tiny folded note hidden beneath the saucer. You raise an eyebrow. She only smirks and curtsies. This is your dance now. Quiet conspiracies played out over crockery and herbal infusions. The note is brief. He saw the bird. He'll wait near the southern well at moonrise. You don't smile, but you do close your eyes for a beat too long. There's something dangerously delicious about being desired, not for your dowry, or your name, or your father's sword collection, but for your mind, your mouth, your margin notes. He once said he loved how you speak when you forget to be clever. It was the strangest compliment you've ever received, possibly the most sincere. You glance toward your shelves. Books line every space you've demanded over the years. Psalters, medical texts, poetry, histories. One tucked behind the others is your favorite, an old Arthurian romance with frayed edges and too many dog-eared pages. The heroine is clever, of course, but she's also angry and honest and very tired of waiting for her knight. You relate? A fringe theory you once overheard during a banquet suggests that many tower-bound ladies developed secret sign languages with their handmaidens. 3 taps means send word. A touch to the sleeve means he's watching. UNB use glances. Not subtle, but efficient. It's amazing how much one can communicate with a raised eyebrow and a feigned cough. You think about leaving. Often. Not in some dramatic escape down knotted sheets, but something quieter. A slow fade. One day you simply don't return from the herb garden. You vanish into a cloistered library, or a merchant ship, or someone's arms. Someone who sees you not as a prize to be claimed, but a partner to conspire with. Still, tonight, you'll stay. You'll write another note. Tuck it beneath a book spine. You'll eat dinner in silence. Nod politely to passing men who think your gaze is admiration rather than calculation. You'll listen to the wind batter the window and pretend it doesn't sound like a sigh. And when the moon rises, you'll light a candle. Not to pray. Not this time, but to signal. Not because you're waiting, but because you've already chosen to go. The great hall is already echoing with music when you descend. You move slowly, not out of caution, but precision. Every step is measured, every turn of your head calibrated for effect. You're not merely attending the evening's dance, you are part of its design. The floor is polished to a slippery sheen, reflecting torchlight and laughter. You trail your fingers along the balustrade, feeling the vibration of lutes, shawms, and tambourines thrumming in the wood. Below, pairs are forming, some out of duty, others out of poorly concealed longing. You know which is which. You always do. Dancing in court is never just dancing. It's negotiation set to rhythm. Every bow, every offered hand, every pirouette around the banquet table is political. You once declined a dance with a minor baron and triggered a month-long feud between 2 houses, all because you wanted to avoid his breath, which always smelled faintly of onion and ambition. Historians still debate whether courtly dance was a tool of romantic expression or rigid social theater. In truth, it was both. The movements were slow, deliberate, and deeply coded, gestures meant to convey everything that words could not. A sideways glance at the wrong time could start a rumor. A misstep might imply disinterest, or worse, rebellion. You've studied these codes like scripture. Tonight, your partner is the younger son of an aging count, too eager, too sweaty, but harmless. He offers his hand with the kind of trembling that tells you he rehearsed this in front of a mirror. You smile, not too warmly, and allow yourself to be led into the pattern. The music shifts into a brawl, and your feet glide automatically. You could do this in your sleep. In fact, you nearly do. Your mind drifts to a letter left under your pillow, unopened. You didn't read it because you know what it says. You know because you nearly wrote it yourself. Across the hall, a pair catches your eye. Not the most graceful, but deeply in sync. The way their hands brush, the way their eyes meet and hold just too long, it's clear. They're not supposed to be dancing together, which makes it all the more fascinating. You wonder how long it will be before someone notices. You give it 10 minutes, Maybe less if the Duchess with the jeweled veil turns her head. There's a quirky old custom here, one you've only witnessed once. If a dancer drops their sash during a set, they must kiss the hand of the one who retrieves it. It sounds innocent. It is not. That sash might as well be a declaration of war. You remember when Lady Anne accidentally let hers fall near the Duke's steward. It was 3 weeks before his fiancée stopped speaking to her, and 2 months before Anne mysteriously left for her cousin's estate to rest. Tonight, no one drops a sash, but someone's glove lies abandoned near the high table. It's pale blue suede, delicate, expensive. You know exactly whose it is, and you know who's pretending not to see it. You finish your set and curtsy. The Count's son bows so deeply he nearly falls. You offer him your hand to steady him, part kindness, part theater, and glide away before he can ask for another round. In the alcove, you allow yourself a moment to breathe. Your slippers pinch, your corset itches, and your neck aches from keeping your chin at that perfect angle. You lean against a stone pillar, watching the dance continue without you. For a moment, it almost feels like you've vanished, like you're a ghost, haunting your own narrative. You once read about a court in southern France where women could request a new dance partner by tossing a sprig of rosemary at his feet. You've always liked that. Quiet, fragrant rebellion. You carry rosemary sometimes, just in case. The musicians strike up a slower rhythm now, a pavane, stately and mournful, a dance for morning lovers and quiet regrets. You almost step forward, then stop. Instead, you walk the long way back to your chambers. Let someone else interpret the music tonight. Outside the hall, the air is cool and smells faintly of wood smoke and wet leaves. Your candle has burned low. You carry it back like a relic, lighting your way through corridors that feel more like tunnels. You think about the next time you'll dance. You wonder who will watch, and whether you'll mean it when you smile. You're halfway down the gallery when it happens. The glove drops. Not yours. Of course. You would never be so clumsy. But Lady Isabel, ever dramatic, lets hers fall with a sigh that could fell an entire orchard of suitors. It lands silently on the velvet runner, just at the feet of a nearby knight. He doesn't hesitate. He bends to retrieve it, kisses the soft suede, and returns it with a flourish that makes several onlookers pretend to be scandalized. You watch from the shadows, half amused. This old ritual, dropping a glove, has passed from practicality to performance. No one's genuinely losing anything anymore. It's all deliberate, all staged, and yet, somehow, it still works. Gloves are the perfect weapon, small, elegant, and always close at hand, pun unavoidable. To drop one is to start a conversation without speaking. To return it is to accept the rules of engagement. You've never dropped one in public, but once, just once, you left a single silk glove on the chapel pew, and someone returned it to your chamber door tied in a red ribbon. No note, no explanation, just a quiet acknowledgement that they understood. Historians still argue whether these gestures were genuinely romantic or just fashionably choreographed flirtations. The line is blurry, especially when you consider that duels were sometimes fought over glove-related offenses. A glove to the cheek, an insult. A glove pressed to the lips, an invitation. A glove tucked into a girdle. That was anyone's guess. Tonight, you wear dove-gray gloves, lined in rabbit fur. They are soft, warm, and entirely neutral. No messages embedded, or so you hope. You've learned that sometimes. Even the absence of a signal can be interpreted. Silence speaks, and so does simplicity. Your own pair remains firmly in place until after dinner, when you're summoned for a walk along the colonnade. The Duke's cousin, clever, charming, a little too aware of it, offers you his arm. You accept. Not because you're interested, but because it's useful to appear as if you might be. As you walk, he talks. Of falconry, mostly. Men love to speak of birds they can't quite tame. You nod, ask two well-placed questions, and let his confidence swell. Then, mid-sentence, you gently pull your glove off with your teeth and hold it loosely in your left hand. Just for a moment. He stops talking. He notices. He hesitates. And then, you slide it back on with a shrug and ask him something benign about the Duke's stables. The conversation limps forward, slightly off rhythm. You've shifted the balance. There's a fringe theory among the younger ladies that the way you remove your gloves speaks volumes. Finger by finger means you're toying with someone. A single smooth motion means you're serious. Removing both? Scandalous. Leaving one? Dangerous. You're not sure if any of this is true, but it gives the glove a certain mystique, doesn't it? Back in your chamber, you lay your gloves beside the candle and smile faintly. They smell faintly of lavender and firewood. You recall the scent on his cloak the last time you passed him in the chapel vestibule. You once read a poem that described a glove as a second skin stitched with secrets. You liked that. You even copied it into your journal, then crossed it out because it sounded too sentimental. Still, you sometimes wonder what would happen if you dropped a glove in the middle of the great hall and kept walking. Would someone pick it up? Would anyone dare? Would it mean anything at all? Or have the symbols worn thin from centuries of performance? You think maybe you'll try it someday, but not tomorrow. Tomorrow, you'll wear red gloves. You haven't worn red in months. And when someone comments on them, as they always do, you'll smile and say, "Oh, these old things," and let the silence do the rest. You're seated near the hearth, fingers stained with ink, and you're furious at yourself again for falling for a poet. Not falling romantically, of course. You would never be so reckless. But you did allow him to read your margins, the lines of verse you scribbled alongside your theology texts. And now he's gone and turned them into a ballad. Worse, everyone at court is humming it. The refrain is unmistakable. She walks in silence, where thunder dares not tread. You nearly choke on your cider when the bard sings that line during supper. Your cousin glances at you with raised eyebrows. The Duchess claps politely. You pretend not to hear the way the lyrics rhyme too neatly with your own unfinished poem. You once thought writing was private. It isn't. Not here. Not when words are currency, traded like spices across banquet tables and through scrolls tied in ribbon. A single stanza can make or unmake a reputation, which is why you're now regretting ever letting him see your copy of Ovid. Historians still puzzle over the extent to which noblewomen were active participants in the literary world, or merely muses for male authors. The truth lies somewhere in the parchment folds, between inspiration and appropriation. There's evidence that women wrote, translated, annotated, but their names were often stripped away, replaced with initials, or, worse, the phrase, "anonymous lady of the court." You vow not to become one of them. The poet corners you the next morning in the Solar. He has the nerve to smile, smugly, apologetically, beautifully. "You inspired me," he says, as though that's enough. You raise your eyebrow and respond, "That next time." He might try attribution. He says your name wouldn't scan properly in verse. You tell him that's a failure of his meter, not your identity. He laughs, which is infuriating, and kisses your hand anyway. The room is too small, and the sunlight too warm, and you're dangerously close to forgiving him. You don't, but you do allow him to walk with you once around the herb garden before sending him on his way with a critique of his enjambment. There's a story you love about a lady who wrote poems in lemon juice, invisible unless held over a candle. Her verses were never meant for public recitation, only for the one who knew to look. You've tried it. It works, though it burns the page if you're careless. Much like love. Later, you find a new poem left tucked inside your psalter. The handwriting is unmistakable. The title is in Latin, but the message is plain. He's trying to apologize. You read it once. Then again. Then, with careful fingers, you tear it into strips and feed it to the fire, but not before copying one of the lines into your own journal. Altered slightly. Improved. There's a fringe belief among court scribes that certain verses, when read aloud under a waxing moon, can make someone fall in love with you. You've never tried it, not because you don't believe, but because you don't need magic. You have timing, and syntax, and eyes that say more than any rhyming couplet ever could. You're tired of being someone else's muse. You'd rather be the author, and from now on, you'll write in ink no one else can borrow. You're kneeling on a velvet cushion, threading gold into linen while two maids chatter quietly near the window. One is reciting a riddle, the other laughs and misanswers, and neither is particularly good at whispering. You smile, politely, but your focus is elsewhere, on the needle in your hand, and the man you were forced to marry last spring. He isn't cruel. That would be easier. No, he's courteous, distant, and meticulously dutiful. He kisses your hand in public and never raises his voice in private. He calls you my lady, as if he's addressing a statue. The marriage was arranged, of course. You'd known since you were 14 that it would come to this. His lands bordered your father's. His family owed favors. Your dowries aligned like stars in some celestial spreadsheet of property. It made sense. Everything does. On parchment. Historians still debate whether medieval women like you had any say in their marital fates. Some noble women negotiated contracts, set stipulations, even added escape clauses. Others, like you, were simply handed a date and a dress. You remember the ceremony mostly for the embroidery on your veil and the cold of the ring on your finger. You remember thinking, this is not the worst outcome, and then you remember nothing for 3 days. But you're clever. You survive in silks. You found ways to claim slivers of space within the embroidered net that holds your life together. You manage the household. Of course, and your steward knows better than to question your inventories. You write letters to other ladies across the realm, coded, careful, and slightly more honest than your marriage vows. You've even claimed a bit of physical freedom, a chapel alcove you call your own, a small door near the rose garden that leads to the falconer's shed. The falcons don't mind your company. Neither does the falconer. That's where you go today, after you finish the embroidery. You bring a scrap of meat, tuck it into your sleeve. The birds watch you with black glass eyes, perched and waiting. So does he. The falconer is quiet, sun-browned, and speaks only when he must. You like that. He never calls you my lady. He calls you by your name, just your name. The first time he did it, you nearly dropped your glove. You don't touch. You don't need to. There is something exquisite about standing beside someone in silence, both of you pretending not to burn. A fringe belief says that if a falcon returns to your glove without hesitation, it means your heart is true. You've never tested this, but sometimes you extend your arm anyway, just to see which one of you flinches first. Back at the manor, your husband is inspecting wine casks. He doesn't ask where you've been. He never does. That's the quiet agreement between you. You play the part. He plays his. Neither of you is interested in rewriting the roles. Tonight, you dine together. The roast is dry, the wine passable, the conversation minimal. You compliment the steward's work. He comments on the state of the eastern fields. You smile when expected. You touch your lips to your goblet at regular intervals. You never let your eyes drift toward the empty chair near the end of the table. It's not for anyone, not officially. Before bed, you place your embroidery carefully in the cedar chest. Gold threads shimmer against the linen, a pattern of climbing vines and birds mid-flight. He hasn't noticed what it is yet. He won't. But someday, someone might realize the vines form letters, that the birds are arranged in a code, and that the message, stitched line by careful line, simply says, "I am still here." There's something deliciously ironic about how scandal hides best in silence, in a court filled with constant clatter of goblets, gossip, and gilded flatteries. It's the quiet corners that harbor the most noise. You're supposed to be in your chamber, practicing lute, or Latin, or some other appropriately ladylike pursuit. Instead, you're barefoot on the cold flagstones beneath the tapestry of St. Margaret, slipping through a narrow archway toward the lesser hall. The torchlight here flickers more than it illuminates, which is precisely what you want. You're not alone, of course. That would be reckless. You're accompanied by B, whose talent for diversionary coughing fits and door unlatching is second only to her disapproval. 10 minutes, she warns under her breath. If I say mercy, you leave. Whether he's kissed you or not, you don't plan to be kissed. Not tonight. But you've brought the ribbon he gave you last summer, when you both accidentally ended up at the same shrine. A ribbon means something. Not enough to be improper, but enough to make a point. Historians still debate how frequent illicit liaisons were among noblewomen. Some scholars romanticize the notion of passionate, torchlit meetings. Others insist these were rare, exaggerated, or entirely fictional. You could tell them a few stories that would settle the debate. You won't. Behind the tapestry lies a small storage chamber, once used for scrolls, now abandoned. A basket of candles still sits in one corner, some burned to nubs, others never touched. You use one to light the room, careful not to scorch your hem. He's already there. He always is. Tonight, he looks tired, not from labor, but from waiting. You nod at each other in the sort of greeting that might pass between conspirators, which, in a way, you are. His tunic is too fine for his station. Your veil is too sheer for discretion. You both notice. Neither comments. He speaks first. Always does. He asks about your embroidery. You lie and say you've finished it. He says he saw the falcon today. You don't ask how. You know, there's a custom in this court, more tradition than law, that no servant may remain in a room with two nobles after vespers. It's meant to preserve propriety. But it's really just plausible deniability. Tonight, you're not breaking any rules, but you're drawing dangerously close to their edges with chalky fingers. You hand him the ribbon. Say nothing. He takes it with a stillness that betrays more gratitude than words could carry. You should leave. You don't. Instead, you ask him whether he believes in ghosts. Not the moaning, sheet-draped kind, but the ones that live in letters, in rooms you never revisit, in the scent of cloves on a borrowed scarf. He says yes. He says he met one once. He doesn't say who. You don't ask. There's a fringe superstition among the kitchen staff that if you light a candle with someone else's matchstick and it stays burning, your love is fated. You think it's nonsense. But tonight, the candle burns long and bright, even as your breath hits it. You don't touch. Still. Not even hands. But when he asks whether he may write to you, plainly, foolishly, you say yes. You leave first. Always do. You nod to B, who pretends she wasn't listening with her entire soul. Back through the hall, back behind St. Margaret, and into the safety of officially sanctioned behavior. Later, you sit at your writing desk, fingers hovering over parchment, pen hovering over ink. You consider what to say, how to say it, whether to say anything at all. In the end, you write just 3 words, I saw you, and press a sprig of rosemary between the folds before sealing it with wax. The banquet is in full roar when you slip into your seat, 2 heartbeats after Eleanor of Aquitaine arrives. It's no accident. You've timed it precisely, just enough to be noticed, not enough to overshadow. A subtle art, court presence, and no one wields it better than her. She sits at the high table, rings glinting, hair woven into a crown of strategic braids, each a statement. You've never seen someone wear silk like its armor. The musicians hush as she raises her goblet. When Eleanor speaks, even fire pauses to listen. You've heard the stories. Of course, everyone has. Married to one king, then another, crusader, queen, patron of poets and policies alike. She's been loved, feared, worshipped, exiled. She wrote letters in Latin, dictated strategies in Occitan, and, according to a fringe theory, once punched a bishop. You're not sure that part is true, but you wish it were. Historians still argue whether Eleanor was a political mastermind or simply a woman surviving in a man's world with flair. Some scholars dismiss the tales of her power as exaggeration. Others say she shaped an entire generation of courts, especially those steeped in courtly love. You believe the truth sits somewhere in her smile, sharp, amused, and slightly bored. Tonight, she notices you. Just once. A flicker of her eyes. A twitch at the corner of her mouth. It's not friendship. It's recognition. She knows what it means to sit at a table surrounded by men who underestimate you. She also knows how to turn that underestimation into leverage. You eat in silence, listening more than speaking. Around you, the conversation shifts like wind, trade routes, military excursions, poetry, always poetry. Someone quotes a troubadour, badly. You sip your wine and do not correct them. Afterward, you near the great hearth where Eleanor is seated with a few other ladies. She's telling a story, one of her travels through Aquitaine, how a donkey once outran her entire escort. Everyone laughs, some genuinely, others strategically. You do neither. She notices. You don't believe me? She asks. You hesitate, then shake your head. I believe the donkey. I'm just not sure about the escort. She laughs. A real one. Short, sharp, and completely unguarded. Later, as the guests disperse, she catches your arm, not hard, just enough to root you. You write, she asks? Not do you write, but you write, like a statement of fact. You nod. Good, she says. Write something they'll be too afraid to burn, and then she's gone. You stand there for a moment, the air still carrying the scent of cinnamon and roasted meat, feeling like something inside you has shifted. Back in your chamber, you sit at your desk and pull out a fresh sheet of parchment. You dip your pen and write the first line of a story. Your story, but with names changed. Of course, for now. Just enough plausible deniability to keep it safe. You write until the candle gutters low, then you fold the page, slide it beneath your embroidery frame, and whisper to no one, "I saw her." You wake before sunrise and wander to the garden, drawn not by prayer or habit, but by the itch of being watched. Not in the literal sense, there are no footsteps, no rustling leaves, but a sense, like a whisper pressed behind your ear, that someone has noticed what should have gone unnoticed. You bring your embroidery hoop as cover. No one questions a lady tending roses while pretending to stitch vines. But today, you're not here for the herbs or the thorns. You're here for the wall. More precisely, the gap in the wall, just past the hedge of feverfew. A place servants pass through, gardeners disappear into. It's not technically a secret, just overlooked, which, as you've learned, is more useful than secrecy. You don't wait long. The maid arrives with her basket of cloths and one folded note tucked beneath a lavender sachet. She doesn't look at you. She doesn't need to. You retrieve it as if brushing a spider from your lap. It's short, just a place and a time. And a single word that you never expected him to use. Safe. Historians still argue about the logistics of medieval love affairs. How did they find the time, the place, the courage? The simple answer: with help. Maids, stable boys, falconers, those whose invisibility made them invaluable. The unsung cast of love stories scribbled in margins and whispered into twilight. You don't run, you walk, slow and stately, back to your chamber. You pass your husband along the gallery. He's in conversation with a steward and barely registers your nod. You smile anyway. It's better when he doesn't notice. At midday, you slip out again, this time under the pretense of collecting herbs for the apothecary. You even carry a small pouch of crushed thyme to sell the lie. The gate by the southern orchard creaks like it always does, but no one turns. The guards trust your comings and goings now. He's waiting near the stone well, not leaning, not lounging, standing, arms crossed, as if unsure whether this was a good idea. You share the sentiment. You cross the distance slowly. When you stop in front of him, he doesn't speak. He just holds out his hand, not in demand, but in offering. You place your hand in his. Not for long. Just long enough to count 4 heartbeats and wonder if they're all yours. There's a tradition in some corners of the kingdom, secret gardens, maintained by the women of the court. Not ornamental gardens, real ones. Hidden places with walls too high and keys too few. It's said they're for solitude. You suspect they're for survival. This isn't one of those, but it could be. He tells you of a place farther south, a house with an orchard, no servants, no rules. You laugh, not mockingly, but gently. That sounds like exile, you say, not paradise. He doesn't argue. You sit together under the yew tree and speak of small things, the weather, the festival. A poem someone butchered at last night's banquet. He doesn't compliment your beauty, thank heaven. Instead, he asks what you're reading. You tell him, and for the next hour, you are not a wife, not a title, not a political bridge between 2 fiefdoms. You're simply a woman, reciting Ovid to a man who listens. There's a fringe belief in certain convents that truth can only be spoken beside water. Wells, springs, baths, something about reflection, perhaps. You glance into the well beside you and see nothing but shadow. Before you part, he asks nothing of you. Not a promise, not a kiss, only whether you'll return. You say yes, because in this court, sometimes a single yes, spoken plainly and without condition, is more intoxicating than any poem. You tuck the note he gave you into your bodice, next to your skin, and you don't read it again, because once is enough. The falcon watches you from the perch, head tilted, eyes unreadable. You've come to envy that, being unreadable, in a court where every breath is noted, every blush a bulletin. You sometimes wish you had feathers instead of skin. You're in the muse early, earlier than anyone expects. The air still carries the night chill, and the scent of straw and leather hangs thick. The falconer isn't here yet. That's intentional. You came not to speak, but to think, among wings and talons and creatures who live for the thrill of flight, not flirtation. At your side is a narrow strip of ribbon, not one you'd wear. It's not silk or dyed, but one you've tied to a lance before. A signal, not to the world, just to him. This morning, you want to remember how it felt to believe. Historians still debate the purpose of the favors ladies gave to knights at tournaments. Some say they were tokens of courtly encouragement, meaningless pretties. Others argue they were declarations of loyalty, sometimes love, or even acts of rebellion. After all, offering a ribbon to a knight other than your husband could stir everything from whispered scandal to open war. You remember the last tournament clearly. Dust choking the air, banners snapping in the wind, and the way your heart thudded, not during the joust, but when he turned toward you, looking only for your approval. You'd never seen anyone bleed so politely. A cracked collarbone, and yet he bowed as if he'd just won your hand. You told him he was foolish. He said you were worth the pain. He said it like a fact, not a compliment. That's what made it dangerous. You press the ribbon against your lips, just briefly, then tie it again to the hook where he'll find it. A message without paper, a signal without ink. Later that day, the lists are drawn up again. There's talk of another tournament. You sit in the gallery, under the canopy reserved for noblewomen, fanning yourself with the same controlled indifference you've practiced since adolescence. The air stinks of horse and sweat and anticipation. He rides in, not first, not last, just precisely when you'd expect. His armor is simple, but his eyes flick once, only once, up to where you sit. You don't wave. That would be absurd. You just let your fan drift a little lower, revealing the bracelet you chose on purpose this morning. It's garnet. He'll understand. A fringe belief among older courtiers is that color choice matters at tournaments. Garnet means loyalty, emerald, temptation, pearl, refusal. You once saw a lady wear all three. It did not end well. The first tilt is uneventful. So is the second. But on the third pass, there's a crack, wood on steel, a shower of splinters, and your breath catches. He rises slowly, not injured, just winded, still. The crowd gasps. You keep your expression carefully blank. You learn something in that moment. Care is harder to hide than affection. After the tournament, there's feasting. There's always feasting, but you slip away early, claiming fatigue. No one questions you. You've earned a reputation for early evenings and quiet piety. Useful lies. Both. Back in your chamber, you untie your hair and unlace your bodice. You sit on the edge of the bed, bare feet against cold stone, and imagine what he might have thought as he rode. Maybe he saw the ribbon. Maybe he knew. Maybe that's why he didn't win. Because some things are only meant to be reached for, not claimed. You hear your name before you see him, shouted, not gently, over the din of drums and laughter. You're at the tournament's closing celebration, held in a temporary pavilion swaddled in tapestries and the scent of roasted boar. The floor is earth, hastily tamped down and covered in straw. And your slippers are already ruined. You don't care. You're still reeling from what you saw on the list today. His final match, his narrowed eyes, the bruise forming along his jaw. Now he's here. Or rather, they're here. Knights, squires, heralds, all half drunken from wine and adrenaline, stomping about as if the kingdom depends on who can empty a goblet fastest. You linger near the edge, half obscured behind a pillar, and a lady with far too many pearls. Then he calls again, louder, and this time, heads turn, including yours. It's foolish, so foolish, but you step forward. The room hushes by half. Conversations continue, but slower, softer, as though the court itself is holding its breath. You stand before him now. He's flushed, gauntleted, glowing with that dangerous combination of triumph and exhaustion. He bows, not to you, but to the air just beside you. Smart, too smart. Historians still argue about the nature of public flirtation in the medieval court. Was it a performance, a challenge, a veiled declaration wrapped in metaphor, or simply a socially accepted method for dancing dangerously close to scandal without tripping? This feels like all of the above. He offers you a rose, not the red of conquest, but pale cream, respect, affection, patience. Your heart betrays you by speeding up. You reach for it, slowly, 2 fingers only. Then, instead of plucking it from his hand, you press the bloom gently back toward his chest. He flinches, not from rejection, from recognition. You murmur, "Not here," and glide away. You don't stop walking until you reach the back curtain of the pavilion. Once there, you lean against the post and press a hand to your temple. Not in pain, just to quiet the whirling. B appears, as she always does. She doesn't ask, just lifts the hem of your sleeve and shows you the note she's tucked there. Same place, midnight. If you'll come. You crush it in your palm, not out of anger, but tension. You want to go. You do. But not because of the rose, or the match, or the music still humming from the tent behind you. You want to go because, in that moment, when everyone else saw the night, you saw the boy beneath the bruises, the one who once gave you his glove without saying a word. There's a fringe belief, probably nonsense, that if a woman accepts a rose at a tournament and carries it back into her chamber, the knight is fated to dream of her for 7 nights straight. You don't take the rose, but you remember it. You arrive late, nearly midnight, nearly not at all. The garden is cold, not biting, but enough to remind you that you've come here alone. He's waiting by the southern wall, not leaning this time, not speaking. When you step into the light of the torch he's brought, you see that he's not wearing armor, just a wool cloak, and hope. You don't touch. You don't speak. You just sit beside him, on the stone bench. So close, your shoulders nearly brush. You stay there, together, in silence, long enough to hear the wind change, long enough to know it won't last, and long enough that neither of you will ever quite forget this moment, even if you never speak of it again. The invitation arrives tied with black thread, never a good sign. You recognize the seal before you even touch it. A stag rampant, surrounded by stars. It belongs to Lady Alienor, your oldest friend, and possibly, if you're honest with yourself, your most formidable rival. You break the wax with a hairpin and unfold the parchment, careful not to tear the embroidered edge. It's a summons, not a request, not a gentle suggestion, but the kind of elegantly worded obligation only women of your rank can inflict on one another. Tea, 3 days hence, at her private apartments. You already know what it means. She suspects, not necessarily the truth, not yet, but enough of a whisper, enough of a name dropped in passing or a glance held too long at a feast, enough to prick her instinct for drama and draw blood. You sigh, fold the letter back, and place it into your coffer. Then you begin to prepare. Historians still argue whether medieval women were truly at odds with each other, or whether the trope of catty court rivals is a modern imposition. They point to records of friendships, shared poems, co-signed petitions, but those same letters often include subtle insults in Latin, passive-aggressive embroidery, and deeply coded messages in flower arrangements. You and Alienor have traded compliments like swordplay since you were 13. You once wrote her a poem so laden with subtext, it required a monk to decode it. She retaliated by gifting you a veil dyed in a shade of green, so precise it matched the eyes of your former suitor. You wore it anyway. Now, as you dress for tea, you choose your weapons carefully. Not words, yet, but silk gloves, modest jewelry, a ribbon tied just loosely enough to imply you were rushed, but not disheveled. You bring no letter, no poem, no favor, just a single white camellia tucked into your sleeve. A flower that says, in the language you both pretend not to speak, "Let us be honest." She receives you alone, which is unusual. There are always ladies about, fluttering and fanning and listening, but today the room is still. She pours your tea herself. "How is your embroidery?" she asks. You smile. Progressing. Any new motifs? Vines, mostly. Birds. Not falcons? Your hand stills for half a second. That's all it takes. She sips. You sip. A silence blooms between you. Then she says it. "I saw him. You know." You look up. Slowly. "Did you?" She nods. "He watched you like a poet watching his own words walk across the room." You laugh. Low and dry. "That's dramatic. Even for you." She leans back, considering. "I wonder," she muses, "how long it would take for someone to forget a woman like you. After a fall, after exile, after disgrace." You set down your cup. "And I wonder how long it would take for a woman like you to admit she's afraid of being forgotten." There's the barest flicker in her eyes. Then she smiles. "I'm not your enemy," she says. "Not yet." You nod. "Then don't make me one." A fringe tradition, rarely spoken aloud, claims that if two women exchange combs during a private meeting, it binds them to mutual silence, each holding the other's secrets in trust. You don't carry a comb today, neither does she, but when you rise to leave, she takes your hand and presses something into it, a ring, simple, silver, set with a moonstone. "For when you forget who you are," she says softly, "or when you try too hard to remember." You say nothing. You tuck the ring into your glove and exit without a curtsy. That night, you write nothing, but you dream of falcons flying low and fast, and of two women seated at a table, drinking tea like it's a duel. The candle sputters, and you curse softly under your breath, more from habit than frustration. You're up too late again, hunched over a book you're not supposed to have, reading by light you're not supposed to waste. The saints on the wall frown down at you from their tapestries. But you ignore them. Saints rarely approve of curiosity. You found the book weeks ago, misfiled behind a commentary on Augustine, a thin volume, bound in cracked leather, with no title on the spine. You opened it expecting prayer. Instead, you found Ovid, but not just Ovid, Ovid annotated, by a woman. You don't know who she was. Her name is never signed, only her initials, A.G. But her handwriting curls like wind across the margins. She has opinions. She disagrees. She underlines lines about longing and power, circles phrases that hint at autonomy. She's bold. You like her. Historians still argue whether noblewomen had access to secular texts, or whether those who did were merely anomalies, exceptions swept aside by scribes who couldn't fathom their literacy. Yet here in your hands is proof that someone like you not only read but responded. A voice speaking across time, scribbled in walnut ink. You've begun replying. Not on the actual pages, you wouldn't dare, but in a separate notebook tucked inside your psalter. You answer her questions, echo her arguments, build upon her jokes. She wrote, "Love is a game men teach women to play, then punish them for winning." You wrote, "And we still win anyway." Tonight, you read her most scandalous note yet. Next to a passage about stolen kisses and hidden chambers, she's written, "Even saints were young once. Don't let them lie to you." You clap your hand over your mouth to stifle a laugh, then glance at the tapestry of Saint Cecilia and whisper, "Sorry." There's a fringe belief in the southern courts that books, once annotated by a woman in love, carry echoes of her heartbeat, that if you press your ear to the spine, you can still hear it, fluttering between the pages. You've tried it. Once, nothing but silence. But it didn't feel empty. You now keep the book wrapped in linen, stored beneath your writing desk. You tell others it's just a volume of moral instruction, which isn't technically a lie. Morals, after all, come in many forms. Sometimes you imagine meeting A.G., sitting beside her in some sun-drenched scriptorium, sharing ink and secrets and dry commentary on court life. You think she'd understand. You think she might have dropped gloves too, or stood just a little too close to someone at Vespers, or known how to smile without meaning it, and how to mean it without showing it. You begin to wonder, is this what love looks like when it has no outlet, when it cannot be spoken, or acted upon, or acknowledged, only read, and reread, and preserved in the margins? You copy one of her annotations onto a scrap of vellum and leave it folded beneath the falconer's bench. You don't know if he'll find it, or understand it. But that's not the point. The point is that you're speaking, even if no one answers. The news arrives wrapped in black thread. Again. This time, it isn't an invitation. It's a notice. He's dead. No name is written, just the title, Lord of Elam, slain en route to Chartres. But you know it's him. There's no one else it could be. His elder brother had long since vanished into debt and exile. He had only just begun using the title. You never heard him say it aloud. You sit in silence for a full hour, staring at the creases in the parchment. You trace the broken wax seal with your thumb, as though you could press it back together and reverse the meaning. You do not cry. Your maid asks whether you're ill. You tell her yes. It's the first time you haven't lied. Historians still debate how noblewomen handled grief, whether it was expected to be public and performative, or quiet and internalized. Certainly, Widowhood brought strange freedoms, but mourning for a man you were never allowed to love. That is something with no script, no etiquette, no embroidery pattern for sorrow kept secret. You walk through the garden that evening, and every leaf looks like a letter unsent. The rosemary bush by the path is beginning to bloom. You pick a sprig without thinking and crush it between your fingers. Remember me. You recall a fringe belief told to you once by a nursemaid, that if someone dies while still holding love in their heart, their soul will hover until the one they loved speaks their name aloud. But if the name is never spoken, they remain restless. A shadow without a shape. You whisper it, once, just once, into your palm, into the dirt, into the silence. Later, in your chamber, you unfold every letter he ever sent. You don't read them, you simply lay them out like stepping stones across the bed, the desk, the windowsill. You stare at them until the ink blurs into lines you can't decipher. You burn none of them. Instead, you take the plainest of the lot, the one written without metaphor, the one that simply said, "If I go, know that I did not want to," and sew it into the lining of your traveling cloak. You don't know why. You're not leaving. Not yet. But it feels like the sort of thing a woman should do when part of her is gone. The next day, you attend prayers. You sit still. You fold your hands. You speak the responses in a voice neither loud nor soft. No one suspects that the name resting in your mouth is not the one you're praying for. You see Lady Alienor watching you across the chapel. Her face is unreadable, but when the prayers end, she approaches. She doesn't ask questions. She only slips something into your glove as you pass her. A small ribbon. Pale blue. No words. Just that. Back in your chamber. You pin it to your mirror. It flutters slightly when you close the door, as if it remembers wind. That night, you dream of falcons with silver feathers. You wake just before dawn and know two things. You cannot say his name again, and you do not need to. You sit beneath a window painted with saints in silence, and read the letter again. It's not from him, of course not. It's from someone far stranger, a woman you've never met, a nun. Her script is small, disciplined, and sharp, like someone who has taught herself to take up as little space on the page as she does in the world. She writes from a cloister 2 days' ride away, where the air is thick with incense and the walls are thick with stories they pretend not to tell. You don't know how she found you? Perhaps through Alienor? Perhaps through whispers? What matters is that she has written, and what she writes is everything. She writes of love, of a man with bright eyes and a quick temper, of meetings by wells and excuses invented for absences. She writes of how he left, of how he died, and how she could not grieve aloud, how she still keeps a piece of his ribbon sewn into the lining of her veil, how she writes because it is the only place she can admit he ever existed. You press the letter to your chest before reading further. Historians still argue about the emotional lives of cloistered women. Were nuns cut off from desire, or merely forced to redirect it into poetry, into God, into the cracks in chapel stone? Some letters have survived, testaments of longing so vivid they read like confessions, or, perhaps, like revolutions. This one is both. She writes that she loved and lost, and then kept loving anyway, that she made her own sainthood, one whispered prayer at a time, in the name of a man no one else dared to name. She writes that she cannot say these things aloud, but she can send them to you, because you will understand. She is right. You write back. You do not give your name, only your initials, like hers. You say, "Yes, I knew that kind of love." You write, Yes, I still feel it. Sometimes like a bruise. Sometimes like a fever. You write, "No, you are not alone." You seal the letter with wax and a sprig of dried mint, the same kind he once tucked inside a page of Ovid. You know she will understand. There's a fringe belief among cloistered women that letters passed between convents carry more than ink, that they carry breath, that to open one is to breathe with the writer. You hope that's true. You hope she feels your breath on her cheek as she reads. You begin exchanging letters weekly. You tell her things you've told no one, not even B. You write of small rebellions, reading after curfew, stitching words into gowns, using salt to draw secret symbols in bathwater. She writes of quiet triumphs, changing a chapel, reading without permission, hiding banned books, saying his name aloud during midnight prayer. She writes of penance and peace. You write of neither, but you both write of endurance. One night, she sends a poem. It's not good, technically, but it guts you. It ends. He was not my sin. He was the reason I still believed in grace. You weep for the first time in weeks. Not loud, not desperate, just enough. You keep her letters in a hollowed-out psalter, a perfect hiding place. She tells you that if you ever visit, you must bring rosemary, not for remembrance, but for protection. You write her that the roses in the garden have begun to bloom again, and that sometimes, when no one is watching, you walk with your head uncovered, just to feel the wind, just to remember what it felt like to want. It's almost laughable how pious you look in the mirror. Your veil is pressed, your neckline modest, your eyes lowered just enough to suggest humility without complete surrender. You smell of frankincense and myrrh, 2 drops dabbed behind each ear, and you carry a book of Psalms tucked against your side like a shield. You have never appeared more virtuous. You have also never lied more effectively. Tonight is the feast of St. Agnes, and the chapel is heavy with incense and expectation. You glide through the nave like a spirit in silk, murmuring prayers between thoughts that would get you excommunicated if spoken aloud. Because tonight, you're not here for the saints, you're here for the secrets. Historians still debate whether noblewomen of the court used religious observance as genuine devotion or calculated camouflage. Did they truly seek holiness, or simply cover for rebellion in the scent of sanctity? You wonder why it must be either or. You've prayed with real fire in your chest, and you've lied beneath icons too. Tonight, your real ritual begins after compline in the corridor behind the sacristy, where you slip a key from your girdle and unlock the small apothecary cabinet. It was entrusted to you for reasons of charitable oversight. No one ever asked what you kept in the second drawer. Inside are your vials, oils, essences, tools, not poisons, of course, nothing dangerous, just fragrant truths. You become something of a legend among the younger ladies for your perfumes. They whisper that you can make someone fall in love with a single drop behind the ear. They aren't entirely wrong. There's a fringe belief in Provence that a blend of crushed violet, orange peel, and rosatar makes one unforgettable to whoever stands downwind. You've worn it only twice. Both times. It worked. But tonight, you choose something else. Laudanum-laced clove and basil oil, designed not to seduce, but to conceal. To mask late-night escapades with a scent of piety, you apply it behind your ears, at your wrists, just below your collarbone. Then you wrap your psalter in a linen cloth soaked with rosemary and frankincense. If anyone opens it, they'll think you're simply over-devout. No one suspects a sinner whose book smells of prayer. You walk back through the chapel, just as the candle-bearers begin extinguishing the votives. Shadows stretch across the tiles, long and quiet and absolved. And you think about him. Not because you're meeting him, those days are over, but because you still wear the perfume he once said made you smell like the inside of a poem. You weren't sure what that meant. You still aren't. But you've never stopped wearing it. Later, alone in your chamber, you unlace your gown and set the psalter on your desk. You uncap a vial of lavender and let a single drop fall onto your wrist. The scent swells, soft and immediate, like memory. There's a story told in the kitchens about a woman who used scented oils to hide not lovers, but bruises. She left her husband in the night and fled to a convent, where she became renowned for her ability to calm restless souls, using nothing but balm and voice. You wonder whether she ever missed the bruises, or if, like you, she found comfort in knowing how well she could cover them. You fall asleep with oil on your skin and prayers on your lips, and dream not of saints, but of hands that touched you only once and left a lifetime of echo. You're supposed to be at the embroidery circle, stitching lilies into altar cloths, smiling gently, and saying things like, "How lovely," or "May I see the hem?" Instead, you're packing, not trunks, yet, just thoughts, just possibilities. The idea has been with you for weeks now, whispering, scratching softly beneath the floorboards of your life. And now, it refuses to stay quiet. You are thinking about leaving, not for the cloister, not for exile, for freedom, and not with a prince or a poet, with the falconer. It sounds absurd even in your own mind, like the plot of a badly constructed morality tale where everyone ends up punished. But you've thought it through, more than once. You've watched him work. You've walked the roots out of the estate. You know which bridges flood in spring, which paths are watched only on festival days. You know how to disappear. Historians still argue whether women of your station ever truly fled with lovers. The rare documented cases are surrounded by so much scandal and literary flourish that it's hard to tell fact from fantasy, but there are gaps in the records, unexplained absences, dowries uncollected, gowns unworn. Someone left those gaps. You intend to become one. B finds you by the garden wall, pacing between rosemary and rue, muttering calculations. You tell her all of it. She doesn't gasp. She doesn't faint. She says, "He's good with animals." "But are you sure he's good? Good with people?" You pause. That part you haven't considered. "I don't need him to be good with people." You say, "Just with me." She nods once. "Then you'll need boots." That night, you write your final letter to the cloistered woman. You tell her that you've made a choice, that you don't know if it's brave or foolish, that perhaps it's both. You write, "Pray for me," though you don't ask for guidance, just a blessing. You sign it with your initials, then add a line from A, G. The marginalia writer. Freedom is a kind of madness, but not all madness is wrong. You meet the falconer at the well before dawn. He brings a small pack, bread, a flask, 2 apples, no questions. You wear a servant's cloak, plain and scratchy. You carry only a comb, a dagger, and the ribbon he once gave you. You don't say goodbye to B. She said hers with her eyes. There's a fringe belief among travelers that if you take 3 sprigs of rosemary from a garden you love and plant them in new soil, they will thrive, if your choice was right. If not, they wither by the next full moon. You take 2, you leave 1. You do not look back until the manor is no longer visible through the trees. When you finally stop to rest, he turns to you and says, "You sure?" You nod. And though he says nothing more, you know this. No poem will be written about you. No minstrel will sing your name in a court you fled. But you are finally writing your story with your own hand. And for now, that is enough. You learn that the silence of the forest is very different from the silence of the court. In court, silence is full of expectation, of judgment, of eyes darting behind fans. It's the silence before someone speaks your name in a way that means trouble. But here, beneath trees, older than your lineage, silence is clean and forgiving. It's been 3 days. Your boots are ruined. Your shoulders ache. The cloak itched so badly the first night you nearly threw it in the river. You miss pillows, hot water, ink, and yet you've never slept more soundly. You travel only by twilight and dawn, resting in daylight. The falconer, whose name you now say freely, over and over, like a spell, knows the land better than you know your own thoughts. He can start a fire with damp wood and silence bees with smoke. Once, he caught a trout with his bare hands. You watched, unimpressed. But when he cooked it with wild garlic, you almost proposed. Historians rarely write what happens after women disappear. There are tales, yes, fragments. A noblewoman turned healer, a runaway who became a poet, a lady knight who disguised herself and was only discovered by the child she bore. But most fade away, as if freedom erased the need for records. You hope to fade. But on your terms. You've started keeping notes again, scribbled in charcoal on birch bark, observations, directions. One morning you wrote, "I no longer wait to be looked at before becoming real." Another, "He hums in his sleep. Not songs, just sound. I fall asleep to it." You keep them folded in a satchel, tied with what's left of your old ribbon. He asks what's in there. You tell him. "Mistakes I meant to make." He laughs until he realizes you're serious. There's a fringe belief in the borderlands that when a woman leaves her title behind, the wind carries her old name into the trees. If the trees are kind, they keep it. If not, the name finds its way back to her. You haven't heard yours spoken since you left. You wonder if the trees accepted it. One night, while camped near a ruined mill, he builds a fire too tall and you scold him. "You want a patrol to see us?" He shrugs. "Let them come." You know he means it. You also know you'd never let it happen. You've woven yourself into this new life with threads stolen from the old. A prayer muttered over supper. A silk cord you still wear as a belt. A fragment of verse you whispered into the stream. You are still you, just quieter, less constructed. And when, one evening, he hands you a carving, rough, crooked, a hawk perched on a gloved hand, you accept it not because it's good, but because it's honest. "This is you," he says. "No," you reply, turning it over in your palm. "This is who I was pretending to be." He frowns. You press your forehead to his and whisper, "But I'd rather be here." There's a final note you add to your birch bark bundle before sleep. Freedom is not the absence of watchful eyes. It is the discovery that you no longer need to be seen to exist, and then you dream, not of saints, nor feasts, nor falcons, but of lace unraveling beneath your hands, stitch by stitch, until all that's left is thread and breath. The lace is finished. You sit beneath a crooked sycamore, bent needle in one hand, and the last scrap of ivory thread curled around your fingers. It's taken months, longer, maybe, You've stopped counting days with candles or bells. The pattern you've stitched isn't one you were taught. It's one you remembered, bit by bit, from memory, instinct, fragments of gowns and veils and table runners. But it's also something new. You've woven birds into the corners, vines through the middle, and, hidden, subtle, initials. Yours, his, hers. Every knot is a memory, every twist a decision. It's not meant to be worn, it's meant to be left behind. Historians will never find it. You fold the lace carefully and tuck it beneath a stone at the base of the tree. You press rosemary and sage atop it, not for superstition, but because they smell like endings. You place a tiny comb beside it, wooden, plain, yours. Not as a keepsake, but as a signal. A final answer to a conversation only two people ever had. Then you stand, brush the dirt from your skirts, and breathe. You've changed. Not so much that the girl in the mirror wouldn't recognize you, but enough that she'd look longer, try to understand, maybe even smile. You still write, not in books, those are long gone, but in dirt, on bark, with smoke. You make stories out of berries and bandages and weather. You once told a tale about a woman who left a court without falling. The children in the village near your hidden cabin didn't believe you. Good. Let them think you were a myth. Let them think you were a ghost who could read, ride, and make perfume that made the air remember her. There's a fringe belief, passed between women who have nothing left to lose, that if you whisper your truth into the wind, and no one contradicts it, it becomes real. You test it one night, half asleep beneath a starless sky, and murmur, I was never anyone's possession. No one contradicts. You smile. He joins you at the fire. He's carrying more herbs than you asked for, and fewer roots than you need. He never learned how to portion properly, but he brings you a peach, too, overripe, sticky, perfect. You eat it slowly while he hums. When the fire dies down, you lie on your back and stare at nothing. The silence here is total, but no longer empty. It is full of what you've chosen. You do not miss the court, not the velvet, not the rules, not the eyes, but sometimes you miss the mirror, because back then you were always trying to become something. Now you simply are. You dream of nothing that night, and it is the most restful sleep of your life. So now, the fire fades, the thread runs out, the lace lies folded beneath stone and memory, and you, dear listener, can breathe. Your journey has been long, across tapestried courts, shadowed alcoves, whispered prayers and stolen glances. You've loved fiercely and secretly, lost gently and publicly, and stitched your truth into places no one thought to look. And now, you rest. The forest holds you. Its hush is not silence, but sanctuary. Every bird that sings does so without permission. Every breeze moves without being watched. You have joined them. You were never waiting to be rescued. You were learning how to unlace the costume of a woman built to be adored, and how to grow into the one who could adore herself, without mirrors, without witnesses. Somewhere far behind you, the court still spins, gloves still fall, ribbons still flutter, poems still circulate on borrowed parchment. But those are stories for someone else now. You have made your own ending. You have made your own peace. So now, breathe. Let your limbs grow heavy. Let your thoughts soften, like parchment curling beside a dying candle. There is nothing more to win, nothing more to prove, only sleep and the sound of your own name echoing softly in your chest. real, steady, and finally, entirely yours. End of script. Sweet dreams.